Adam, thank you very much indeed, and particularly for what Richard said before you took the platform. That emphasis on creation. And for the next 25 minutes, we just want to help you understand what is being created for you to live in, whether in the kingdom or elsewhere around the world, and how there is intelligent urbanization going on. And you can see around, you'll see some data going up there. By 2030, the world is projected to have 43 megacities with more than 10 million inhabitants. And there's plenty of data which you should look at as we're talking. So how innovative, how intelligent can cities be? Even old cities which are living with a legacy of development, certainly during the Industrial Revolution. I'm joined by Nadhmi Al-Nasr, who's the Chief Executive of NEOM, by Patrice Caine, who is Chairman and Chief Executive of the Thales Group, by Andrew MacDonald, I'm allowed to call you Mac, Senior Vice President of Mobility and Operations at Uber, and Jean-Paul Plates, who is the Chief Executive of Petrobras from Brazil. Welcome to all four of you. And I think I need to start talking about NEOM, if we can, Nadhmi, about what you call it, a living lab for solutions. So how is NEOM a relevant precedent for global cities, both in scale and design?
Thank you. First of all, I love this statement when we mention the living lab. Those that have read the vision statement of NEOM start with, it's the land of the future. And for us to not only dream, but to start addressing what the land of the future should be, we cannot jump over putting the living lab for us to help designing that future. And you know, when we think of what's going on in the world, as far as the population growth, everything we are trying to address in NEOM is basically what the whole world is already addressing.
But what relevance is this lab to other major cities around the world with this legacy, which I mentioned earlier, the legacy of the Industrial Revolution and massive population and the kind of numbers we're seeing up here?
That's exactly what we are doing and addressing in NEOM. Is the future cannot continue with what's going on land, on Earth, because the challenges we are facing today in the world cannot continue. So we have the advantage in NEOM of zero legacy starting, but challenges are the same. So we moved to NEOM, and our first step is how can we convert the place we are in into a living lab day and night? How can we convert the land that we are working in to how the world future will be? And today in NEOM, after being there 3-4 years, we've converted the community we are in and living it day to day, in what we think and what we see the future should be. It's an advantage we have that many cities don't. And we are working with others on how can they go against the legacies that they are living with to convert this to a living lab.
Well, let's pick up those themes with Patrice, particularly because Thales, of course, is a leading electronics, digital manufacturer and designer and conceiver and innovator. You also make a point of optimizing what already exists. Where can you see the connectivity between what is happening at NEOM and what you see in many other places where you've got sensing devices and so many other bits of kit?
Well, indeed, NEOM is a very interesting, I would say, test case because we almost start from a blank page. Now, most of the people live in existing cities. So we must as well care about existing infrastructures, existing cities, and see how can we optimize what I call natural resources that are scarce, water, energy, even land has become a scarce resources in some countries. And to do so, first, probably we need to gather data. It first start with gathering data, and we can gather data from Earth, from space, sorry. Space is a very, I would say, important way to gather data, temperature, chemical composition of rivers, seas, and oceans, CO2 emission, which is absolutely important to master the greenhouse gas challenge, and whatsoever.
And methane.
And yes, and methane, absolutely, and methane. And then we need these so-called smart algorithms, data analytics or AI, to help us as human beings to understand and to process all these data to take the most appropriate decisions in terms of optimization of this.
Is there a danger in smart cities, however we characterize them, particularly the older cities, that actually we're going to be overloaded? We're overloaded already with data.
We are already overloaded by data. That's why we really need this processing power and this algorithm to help us, all of us, to take the right decisions. It's also the case in the field of security. A safe city, a smart city, it's also a question of security. And here again, we gather a lot of data in this domain. And how can we make sure that the guys in charge of security have the right, I would say, decision-making tool to take the most appropriate decision in case of any incident, for instance.
Nadhmi, can I just come to you before I go to our other two guests? Security, obviously this isn't a major problem in the KSA, but what are you seeing? Because so many cities are bedeviled by security issues in every community.
Well, you're right. Security is a big challenge, not only to the new cities, but worldwide. And our approach to security in NEOM is how can we basically design and establish and build a very light security system that does not make the citizens living in it living under security challenges.
And Patrice, is that possible?
Yes, this notion of invisible security is absolutely possible. We have started to deploy some of these so-called invisible security measures in Al-Lula, inshallah, tomorrow in NEOM. But yes, indeed, this is absolutely possible.
It is possible because we know it works and it's working, but a lot of work has to be done way ahead. And it's not going to be just a little small theory, but it will have to be done through living it up, no doubt.
Mac, let me come to you, if I may, because obviously Uber is now very well established, its systems are well established, its success is very well established. But what are you finding about dealing with those who run cities, those who are largely democratically elected? Running cities these days is an incredible challenge.
Yeah, it's very challenging. I think the biggest issues we see are the sort of misalignment of incentives, right? People that are building cities, people that are building companies, people that are driving forward with a vision have a very long-term view of how the world should play out. And often when you're talking to political officials or bureaucrats, they actually, by nature of the job, are forced to have a shorter-term view. And so I'm actually really inspired by the notion of the land of the future. It's obviously very aspirational, but it's also very long-term. And at Uber, we think that the future is shared, electric, autonomous, and multimodal, at least when it comes to transportation. But getting cities excited about that vision means delivering short-term wins, helping with near-term priorities like electrification, while working towards longer-term ones like autonomous vehicles.
I mean, what I'm getting to is how much, certainly in what we can call legacy cities, however big they are you actually having to go through a real skilling and educational process for those who run the cities to understand the enormity of change which is underway?
Absolutely, and I mean, we're not the only industry that has to do that, and I think change is often very uncomfortable for folks, especially those who have a vested interest in the status quo. And so I think you have to really tell a narrative of growing the pie, because if you're not telling a story about a better city, a more thriving economy, more employment, more opportunities for everyone just looks to sort of fixate on what they could lose, and that's not a world that we're excited about.
I mean, a basic problem, many of the cities you move into, they have registered licensed taxi systems. And as we know from a place like London, that's been a massive challenge. Is that the kind of legacy we're talking about having to overcome to make best use of what you provide in mobility?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's no finer example of a fixed pie system than a medallion system that says, hey, there are this many number of jobs to be allocated, and now we got to fight over who gets them. I think, again, the point is about moving to a system of multiple modes of transportation that grows the pie for everyone. And I think a lot of what you're seeing in this country is about that future vision, which means all form factors in the transportation sector will grow, and that's really exciting, right? But it is harder for legacy cities. It is harder when you're starting for a basis of how things have worked, and that's often why disruptive companies run into such big roadblocks, and it's why at times Uber's had to be sort of pugnacious in our approach. But I do think if you orient to the long term, it's easier to find common aligned interests.
John Paul, where does all this leave fossil fuels and the kind of normal way in which mobility is created at this moment?
Nix, I come from a country that has more than 70% of this energy mix in renewable already. So it's a country that has done the transition. But of course, there's a lot to do. And I think the biggest aspect that we should look at when you talk about intelligent cities has to do with the two main things in politics in the world: environment and people. And we have to put, unfortunately, we have to choose. People have to be first, because if we develop technologies, intelligence, new fuels, new everything, but all of this results in incrementing the gap, the social gap in some of the countries, it's worth nothing. So we have to be concerned about environment, about intelligence, about digitalization, about all of these things. But all of these things cannot increment the gap. Not in the education, in public health, in public security, in public transportation. We need to converge into a segment of the users that will be paying nothing for good public services. And this is one of the roles that I expect from state companies, either oil in transition or elsewhere. Governments and state companies together to make viable new forms of energy, new forms of cities, new forms of transportation that give us less gap and a lot more.
I'm going to summarize very crudely in order to make a point. The World Energy Outlook from the International Energy Agency this week has said essentially the day of fossil fuels is now over. And we can see that by 2030, 2050, it's going to be a minority. Now, you're smiling, but that's Fatih Birol's assessment there. I ask you that because obviously there's a sustainability issue and so on. What's your judgment as to how much fossil fuels and what you produce at the moment is still going to be central to a city in the future?
Nick, we'll be still producing oil big time in 50 years. That's going to be unavoidable, because not only we will still have need for transportation in specific fuels, and especially during the transition. Let me give you an example. At Petrobras, we are mixing oil, vegetable oils inside our refineries. We're not doing transesterification, biodiesel, but we are putting 5, 7, 10, nearly 15% of vegetable oils inside the desulfurization and in our HDT units in refineries. That is called co-processing. And several of our sister companies, including state companies, are doing the same with their own patents, processes that are invented by them. That is to say that all our oil companies, with a few exceptions, are conducting energy transition big time. But this is a transition, is not a disruption. This is different from Uber, from an invention that changes the way you do things. Energy sources are transversal to the economy. They cannot be substituted in less than decades.
Patrice,
this will happen with oil.
Are you now ahead on technology? In other words, are you developing fast enough? We can easily, on a platform like this, use words like smart, agile, innovative, and so on. But and many people can dream about what's coming down the track. But actually, is the technology there already?
In many domains, yes, and there are still, I would say, fascinating technologies that are, I would say, hugely, I would say, undertapped. If I take one example, quantum technologies, we are far from having imagined all the application of quantum technologies tomorrow. So we speak a lot about AI as of today. It's very fancy because we see a lot of, I would say, concrete applications in our day-to-day life. But tomorrow, believe me, the next revolution will come from quantum.
Because I'm very struck by your principles of what are called true, T-R-U-E, transparent, understandable, and ethical. Can that be applied to a big new city?
This is a very important concept that we have developed for, I would say, potentially controversial technologies, like AI, it's potentially controversial, like biometrics, potentially, it can be controversial. So how do we, I would say, give trust and how do we create trust and confidence vis-à-vis typically citizens? It's by being transparent. So typically a transparent AI is an AI that explains how it produced the results. Understandable means that you can understand the result. It's not something which is totally abstract. And E stands for ethical, because we see more and more this, I would say, obligation to fight against unconscious bias in these algorithms.
Are you at NEOM really having to be very flexible, given technology is changing very fast? The opportunities are changing, allowing for the chip shortage, but there is now a significant ability to do things which probably even 4 or 5 years ago you didn't really imagine were possible.
Are we flexible? Are we to be flexible? For sure. And we have to deal with this flexibility in the design and the journey of building NEOM. And I'll take one example that could summarize NEOM position into this, and that's the line. You must have heard of the line as the main assets of NEOM. We basically picture the future as the following. We see in years to come in NEOM, 9 million people living in a place where it is the size of maybe 5% of London, which is 9 million people, but living with a better health, with a better lifestyle, and all of this with renewable energy. And the way we're going with it is the world cannot continue anymore, continue building the big cities the way we've been doing it. There has to be a massive change to how we do the urbanism of the future.
Let me go back to Mac, if I may, to talk about mobility. We've only got 3 minutes left, but about what you are learning. It's easy to talk about the Uber revolution, but it also comes down to, do people really want to own their own car? Do they want to actually have their own EV? Or will there be the driverless Uber vehicle, which will appear and mean that they don't have to have a car sitting around for 95% of the time, which they never use? Are we moving in that direction very fast?
Yes, we are moving in that direction. And I think the important point to take away is policy really matters and can move us in that direction. I mean, we've 3x the number of EVs on our platform over the past year. Uber is going electric. Uber drivers are going electric at 5 times the rate of personal car owners. But there's tremendous variance in what that looks like across cities. In North America, that's 5%. 5% of vehicles are EVs on our platform. In California, it's 10%. In London, it's 20%. And the reason for that is city policy and government policy driving it. So if we want a multimodal future where people do away with individual cars and use a mix of autonomous vehicles and transit and micromobility and all of these other great modes, policymakers need to lead the way.
Quick question for the last minute. Patrice, first of all, to you, quickly if you can, are we going to be amazed at the way technology does work in cities, even the oldest cities?
Sorry?
Are we going to be amazed at what technology can achieve?
Oh, yes, we will.
At high speed?
It's going to come probably faster than expected. Because the usage and the adoption by the young generation is very, very impressive. So it will come even faster than expected.
Jean-Paul, do you think there's going to be a revolution, even though you say there'll still be a lot of fossil fuels in 2050? Yes or no?
Again, the point is not fossil fuel or whatever, renewable. This is going to go the way. Again, my concern is Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo have more than 15 million people. Less or more than half of these people cannot afford even use taxi or Uber. What are these people going to use? What kind of transportation are they going to use? At least a third of these people in 1 decade will deserve and demand public free transportation. This is the big challenge for the cities.
If we meet again in a year or two, are we going to be amazed what's being achieved, even allowing for the supply line problems of just getting stuff built in NEOM?
The question again?
Are we going to be amazed at what is achieved by NEOM?
Not at all. I tell you, we are encouraged since the start that not we as NEOM only, the NEOM team, which comes from all over the world, we are adamant and very certain and actually very confident that we will reach and present the first future city of the world with all what we believe the world will be living in. So we are pretty sure.
Thank you, Nadhmi, Patrice, Mac, if I may, and Jean-Paul. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the platform.